Okay, now we're going to pull together the behavior of the household or the consumer and the firm to talk about the general equilibrium. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take this alternative production function that we developed a couple of videos ago, and instead of having output up here on the axis, we're going to have consumption. Now, how do we do that? Well, it's actually pretty straightforward. We know that from goods market clearing that consumption is just equal to output minus government spending. So if we want to convert something that is in terms of output into something in terms of consumption, we just subtract off G. And when we do that, we end up with something, a relationship that involves consumption and it involves leisure. So remember, this H minus L, which is N, is hours worked, and so that's just equal to the total time endowment H minus leisure. So think about this for a minute. What we've done is we've now converted the firm's problem into something that involves a trade-off between consumption and leisure. Well, that's exactly the trade-off that consumers are facing. And this is what allows us to bring together the consumer and the firm's behavior into this general equilibrium analysis. And when we do that, we get this figure. And we get what is called the production possibilities frontier. So that's what this black line is. It's the PPF. And the PPF tells you what the economy-wide technological trade-offs are between consumption, which is on the y-axis, and leisure, which is down here on the x-axis. And what you can see, this is the old, I don't know whether in micro you talked about this, but this is the old guns and butter trade-off, that the more leisure you have, say you're down here at a point like this, the less consumption you can have. On the other hand, the less leisure you have, then the more hours you are spending working, and the more you produce, and therefore the more consumption you can have. Now, the really interesting thing about this production possibility frontier is the slope. So what is the slope of this line? Well, it is going to be, roughly speaking, I'll say it's delta y over delta leisure. Now, I know there's consumption up here, but we know that consumption is just y minus g. G is exogenous. So the change in consumption and the change in y are synonymous. And we have down here the change in leisure. Well, this is not quite a marginal product of labor, is it? And the reason it's not is because leisure is equal to total number of hours that you have minus the number of hours you spend working. So what that tells you is that a change in leisure is synonymous to a negative change in hours worked. And for that reason, we can write this slope as the negative marginal product of labor, or negative delta y over delta n. Okay, so we now are describing the firm's problem still, the production possibility frontier, and what is technologically feasible to produce in the economy. By the way, a point inside this PPF, this production possibility frontier, means that you are producing inefficiently. And the reason for that is you can actually produce more consumption without producing any less leisure, or alternatively, you can produce more leisure without producing any less consumption. And so if you're operating inside this PPF, then you know that the economy is operating inefficiently. So now what we can do is we can pull all of this together. We can superimpose the household or the consumer's budget constraint and its choices onto that figure that we just developed, and that will then yield a figure that embeds the consumer maximizing utility. It also embeds firms maximizing profits. We have imposed market clearing in the goods market and the labor market, and we've also imposed the government budget constraint. So all in all, we now can produce a picture that embeds the definition of a competitive equilibrium. And you can go back and double check what that means in the notes. So in terms of the algebra or the notation, the equilibrium is just going to be a bunch of variables with stars over them. So these star variables are all the endogenous variables that are now being determined. The non-starred things like z and k and h and g are exogenous variables. So this gives us a solution which is endogenous variables in terms of exogenous variables.